Hey, what's going on, guys? In this video, we're going to learn about the full history of the Rolex Air King, from its humble beginnings in 1945 all the way to the recent 2022 update that was just revealed on March 31st at Watches and Wonders. We will cover all the various changes to the Rolex Air King line, and at the end of this video, we'll explain why the 2022 update is so overdue. Let's dive right in. Much like the Rolex Explorer, the Rolex Air King is often forgotten amongst the more popular Rolex collections, such as the Submariner, Daytona, or even the Datejust, which was released the same year as the Air King. But as an entry-level Rolex, the Air King continues to offer interesting value propositions, especially for vintage value seekers out there, as it is one of the few vintage Rolex models that still cost less than your average car. As one of Rolex's longest running models, the Air King is a watch worthy of your attention. So let's take a quick tour of the Air King's history, while also attempting to keep the aviation puns to a minimum. The Air King takes off. Rolex produced a number of Air models during and immediately after World War II, all for the British Royal Air Forces and its pilots. The Air King was released in 1945. Its 34mm case was considered large at the time, hence the King name. At its release, the Air King was part of a collection of Air watches that included the Air Lion, the Air Tiger, and the Air Giant, but the Air King's reign outlasted the others. The first Air King was reference number 4925, which is now a rare find. It has many of the same features of other Rolex bubblebacks of the era, with a cream dial and even numbered Arabic numerals. This model was followed by a few other references, including reference number 4499. All of these early Air King references housed manual wind hunter movements, making them very similar to other stainless steel watches in Rolex's Oyster collection. The Air King began to acquire its own aesthetic with the traditional reference number 6652 in 1953, which featured the caliber 1030 ticking inside. This is the reference that introduced the creamy silver dial and stick hour markers that became iconic on its subsequent reference, 5500. The Air King, reference number 5500. In 1957, Rolex introduced Air King that would go on to define the line for the next 37 years, reference number 5500. This reference featured a 34mm Oyster steel case with the Oyster bracelet to match. The 34mm size was a bit small even for the vintage era. For example, the other long-lived Rolex of the era was the Explorer reference 1016, which rang in at 36mm. The reference 5500 was fitted either with the caliber 1520 or the caliber 1530, depending on the year of production. But no matter the movement, the Air King was never chronometer certified, so you won't see the familiar words superlative chronometer certified on any vintage Air King dials. Instead, at the 6 o'clock position, you'll see the words precision for the caliber 1520 or super precision for the caliber 1530. In fact, one of the most sought after Air Kings amongst collectors is the double red, which features the words Air King and super precision in red. Rolex collectors, right? Much like the traditional reference number 6652, the reference 5500 typically had a creamy silver dial with stick markers at all the 12 o'clock position. This dial was housed under an acrylic crystal, which was common for the era. Of course, there were variations over the 37-year reign of the Air King. A popular slate gray dial was produced for a many number of years, as well as a black dial. And the Air King is particularly known for many corporate stamped dials. My favorite is the Domino's dial. For many years, Domino's would incentivize its franchises to meet sales goals by giving out unique Air Kings if certain quotas were met. It is a unique collaboration between the two brands you wouldn't normally associate with each other, except perhaps each one's obsession with time. Pizza in 30 minutes where it's free. Based on the popular reference number 5500, the Rolex introduced the Air King date in 1958 with reference number 5700. The design aesthetic was similar to the time-only reference, but it used Rolex's caliber 1535 to add a date function. And to confuse the matter some more, Rolex also made a reference number 5504 case for a while, stuffing some with Explorer dials and some with Air King dials. This was during the Explorer's transitional phase, before the 1016 was released in 1963. In 1989, Rolex introduced reference number 1400, which provided an update to the reference number 5500, which at that point had seen few changes throughout its 37 years. In terms of design, it represented a new approach for the Air King collection. It had Arabic numerals at the 3, 6, and 9 hours and stick markers in between. The traditional stick markers only version was also made available, but the Arabic numeral version proved popular with customers. It also featured a new caliber 3000 movement with a sapphire crystal, providing a much needed upgrade to the Timepiece's hardware. In a slight variation of reference number 1400, reference number 1410, Rolex introduced the engine-turned bezel. While it is not used in any production models now, the engine-turned bezel was a popular alternative for consumers who didn't want the flashy fluted bezel seen on many Datejust or modern sky dwellers, but were also bored with the smooth bezel of the Air King of years past. Rolex only makes fluted bezels with gold or gold mixed materials, so the engine-turned bezel takes on a distinct character from any other Rolex has in current production. But that all changed on the 31st of this month in March 2022. Rolex, for the first time ever, just released a new Datejust with a fluted bezel that is not of a precious metal. The reason for not doing this earlier is that gold is a much softer metal, so to do this with platinum or stainless it would be a much harder job. But finally, they have now figured it out. Fast forward to the year 2000. Both references 1400 and 1410 were updated with the new caliber 3130 movement. In 2007, Rolex replaced the 1400 collection with the reference number 114200. The same year, Rolex also introduced reference number 114234, which had a similar dial design to the reference 11420, but added a white gold fluted bezel to make sure everyone noticed that you were indeed wearing a Rolex. Rolex continued to offer the engine-turned bezel in reference number 114210. All three references continued to utilize the caliber 3130. The same movement was also used in the Explorer reference 114270 during this time period. But for the first time, the Air King has become chronometer certified. The modern Air King reference number 116900. In 2014, the Air King was discontinued. A year later, Rolex introduced a new Oyster Perpetual, leaving many wondering if the Air King had forever succeeded its title as the entry-level Rolex. But in 2016, Rolex introduced a new Air King, reference number 116900. And this wasn't just your daddy's 34mm monochromatic Air King either. This current production model of the Air King featured a 40mm Oyster steel case, the same case as the Milgauss, reference number 116400. It also comes packed with the same caliber, the 3131 movement inside, including the same anti-magnetism features, because the theoretical pilot wearing his Air King needs anti-magnetism just as much as the theoretical scientist sporting a Milgauss, I suppose. Meanwhile, Rolex decided to have some fun with the dial, with the large 3, 6, and 9 numerals separated by the minute markers at the remaining intervals. Add on top of that the green text and the second hand, invoking Rolex trademark green boxes. And you've got yourself a car crash of a design. It's a polarizing execution, but it's almost like Rolex wanted that to be the case. They introduced a new Oyster Perpetual the year before, giving them the opportunity to have some fun with the new Air King, while the Oyster Perpetual held down the simple, time-only, entry-level Rolex moniker. Love it or hate it, you have to admit the strategic plan was executed perfectly by the crown. Over the years, a number of famous people have been spotted wearing an Air King of various vintages. Ryan Gosling has been spotted wearing a vintage Air King, even wearing it when he won Best Actor for his performance in La La Land. John McCain was also known for wearing an Air King for most of his political career. And now that brings us to the newest iteration, just released on March 31st, 2022. Here's a before, and here's an after. Can you spot the difference? Look at the top right, where the 5 is. Every other number that is not at the 3, 6, and 9 has double digits, all except for the 5 at the 1 o'clock position. And not only is the 5 not looking like it doesn't belong, but look at it, it's a little bit larger than the other 2 5s. And that one thing throwing it off irks me so bad I just can't even stand to look at it. But now, thank God, someone has brought it to their attention because they have replaced the 5 with an 05, making it perfectly symmetrical. Finally becoming a great modern contender for a true aviation watch. So I want to know, what do you think about the Air King? What's your favorite reference? Do you like how they fixed the 5 in the new version, or do you prefer the older one? Let me know down in the comments, and let me know what other watch you'd like to see covered next. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm very blessed to be here talking to you today. And if you want to see more videos like this, please like and subscribe. I want to make more videos like this, and when you like and subscribe, it really gives me the motivation to want to do more. Thank you and have a great day.